the international terrorism world. State sponsors of terrorism have been the major reason for most of the terrorist success in the international field over the last decade. Without the state sponsor, the terrorist organization is much less capable, much less able to carry out these acts of these criminal explosions and other acts of assassination. The State Department has made as its primary objective over the last few years, in fact, well into the last decade, the reduction of state-sponsored terrorism. We have a state sponsors list in which governments, nations are placed on that list as designated to be state sponsors of terrorism. We sanction them. We continually investigate other indications of state sponsorship of terrorism around the world. We have, as one of our primary goals and objectives, the elimination of state sponsorship of terrorism.
Right. Thank you, Mr. McNamara. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. Mr. Mazzoli?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate the testimony of the witnesses. I find myself really in somewhat of an awkward position here because it seems like we've really concentrated in this hearing, at least at this phase of it, by concluding that this was an act of international terrorism, probably state-sponsored, and that these individuals seem to have had something to do with it. And it's hard to frame a question that doesn't lapse over that line and get into sort of accusations. But let me try, if I can, to select out a few things. Just one little piece of just housekeeping. I watched some television the other day which suggested that the mosque that these individuals who have been named today either worship at or operate has been stoned. It has been the object itself of activity. And while the police commissioner is not here, and maybe you all wouldn't know, is there any effort to protect that mosque and the people who do worship there?
I don't know the answer to that question, but I would presume that both on the New Jersey side and on the New York side there is a great effort to be sure that there is no backlash against a community on account of information or speculation that has come to the public's attention through the media.
The chairman corrected me. I appreciate that. This is on the other side of the river in New Jersey. I would appreciate maybe, Mr. Chairman, having some information as to whether or not those television reports are correct, and if so, what effort is being made to make sure that people who just choose to worship at that mosque are not themselves subject to any kind of problem, that the mosque itself is not trashed. I believe, Mr. McNamara, you said that at some point, and again, I hesitate to get into this because it does seem to assign guilt, but there was a green card issued to one of the individuals who's involved here, and that green card was then revoked later. Is that correct?
Well, first of all, let me repeat what I said in my opening statement. We have not concluded this is an act of international terrorism.
Well, let me just back up.
Mr.
Fox pretty much said that using the experience he's gleaned over many years, which I yield to and defer to, he seems to have made that conclusion and seemed not particularly bashful about saying so today. So I wonder where we are here. Do we have some disconnect here at this table?
I think Mr. Fox said that it was a professional major terrorist organization. I don't know whether he said that it was a case of international terrorism, but...
Well, if that's the case, I believe that Secretary Sessions, or Director Sessions, said that there had maybe been only one act of what you call international terrorism from 1992 back to 1982, which would suggest that if there is an act of terrorism, we're almost immediately putting it into the category of international type, or am I misreading the tea leaves here?
It seems to me that almost all of those were not cases of international terrorism.
They're all domestic. That's right.
Domestic. Let me say, with respect to the green card, the Sheikh was granted a green card, Sheikh Abdullah Rahman. The Sheikh is not a suspect, I do not believe. I'll cede to the FBI on this. We are talking about him because of the attention that has been gathered in the press and disseminated about him and his status here in the United States. If we're talking about suspects and or people arrested, we are not, as far as I know, talking about green card holders other than the Sheikh. Is that correct, Bill?
Again, I would not comment on any part of it, Congressman Mazzoli. I would, in connection with the question asked of Mr. Fox, what was asked of him, as I heard the question, was about gut reaction. And he talked about gut reaction as an internal matter, what people feel. And it sharpens the focus on the reason why we should not speculate, lest that speculation be taken as fact. This is a continuing investigation. It will take months. You'll recall Pan Am 103. It took years for us to be able to parse it all out and to be able to come to a conclusion. So Ambassador McNamara is absolutely on target. We just should not speculate.
Right. Well, since I believe you, Mr. Sessions, brought up earlier Desert Shield and Desert Storm, that era, I was in Congress at that time, and I well remember what happened to some of my friends back home who happened to be of descent from the areas in the Middle East who really were quite concerned about their own personal safety, their ability to make a living. And so I do think that we really should be guarded. Let me just shift very quickly to one last question. Has it been determined that this was dynamite, pure and simple dynamite?
Has not been determined.
All right.
Definitely. Still, it's under investigation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Geekus.
Chair. Judge Sessions, directing my first inquiry in this round to you, the people on the committee here and the people on the panel, and in fact the whole citizenry, are interested in learning from this experience so that we can embark on a continued program, an expanded program, a target program of deterrence so that these things will not happen again. Deterrence. Your evoking of the statute under which federal jurisdiction was gained pinpoints the correlation between the activities at the World Trade Center and that which we constitute as interstate commerce, thus bringing in any bombing, explosion, etc., that the statute depicts. And also that statute, in talking about when a homicide occurs, would invoke life imprisonment or the death penalty as may be appropriate. It seems to me that in proceeding on this case, in the question of deterrence, that there should be people clamoring on my side in doing everything we can to reimpose the death penalty for these types of things in the federal jurisdiction. Question to you: if, and I'm drawing on your other life as a judge on this, am I correct in trying to draw parallels between the decision in Profit and what this Congress, Profit versus United States, I guess, what was it? In Florida. Profit, yes. Am I gaining your endorsement, shall we say, or at least confirmation, that if the Congress should act to reimpose the guidelines which the first Supreme Court decision obviated or made necessary under Furman, that we could possibly apply this to this case? Now, we're not naming the killers. We don't know who they are. Somebody is a killer out there. When we bring him to justice, I would like to see this Congress be poised and ready to apply the death penalty. And to do so, we'd have to act quickly, and I'm going to ask the chairman to expeditiously provide hearings, just as he did for this issue, on the death penalty legislation which others have produced, which covers this situation. What do you think about that, or don't you want to venture a guess, Judge Sessions?
I think two things. You'll send us all scurrying back to the books to read Profit again.
Yes.
And second of all, you will, of course, look to the Department of Justice to take a position in connection with proposed legislation and a very careful analysis of the Profit circumstance. What, when you started asking your question, did occur to me was this. When I think of deterrence, I think of those steps that law enforcement can logically take, that the FBI can logically take, that would provide a prevention mechanism for this type of circumstance. And I was recalling the Chairman Edwards' question about my reprogramming of special agents out of terrorism. At the time I did it, the agreement with the Attorney General was that we would, if we found that we had made a mistake or that we needed to come back, he would support me in that sort of reprogramming effort. I do believe that the things we've discussed here today, the training, the sharing of intelligence, the working together and cooperatively, as Ambassador McNamara has discussed, provide a deterrence mechanism in the form of law enforcement activity that can bring about real reduction, a historic reduction in the events that happen in the United States, and that probably becomes our best deterrent in terms of what we can control and how we can actually make those things come about.
Well, I understand that. We're all in agreement on that, and I'm applauding your whole concept and your effort. What I'm saying is that the statute that we're involved in, the one that you quoted right from the beginning, and the one which is the foundation for all that we're all trying to accomplish here, calls for life imprisonment or the death penalty. Aren't they part of the deterrent overall atmosphere which we're trying to create?
I think probably
the penalty?
I think probably if you went back and read the congressional intent on that, you would find that those matters were discussed at some length, and that statute reflects their
And you
intent.
don't disagree with the thrust of the statute that calls for these methods of deterrence?
Well, again, it's not mine to agree or disagree, but to defer to the Department of Justice in its view concerning whether or not that interpretation could be made. I would say the Department will review it at your request.
Mr. Sangmeister.
What? Yeah, I have
Oh,
one
your time
quick
is-
question, if I may indulge, with
He's just, as you know, the FBI never takes a position
yes,
on
I
these
know,
issues.
but I'm going to force him to eventually. But
You're longer than the time we're going to give you today.
Yeah, right. Mr. McNamara, one quick question. When you said that the Sheikh at some point when he was given a court order to forego his green card and be deported, claimed political asylum. What was his assertion as to political repression from the Sudan or from Egypt or from where? What was his assertion as to where persecution came?
It had to do with Egypt, yes.
Egypt.
Egypt.
All right. I have no further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Geekus. Mr. Sangmeister.
Mr. Geekus, as my colleague's information in the bill that is shortly going to be before this committee that is being proposed by the chairman and others, the death penalty is very much included therein. So you may want to take a look at that. I guess the question I'd
Probably
like to
has
ask...
different procedures than the one that Mr. Geekus would recommend.
That's the point. I want.
So that the committee is not in a position of being accused of a knee-jerk reaction to what's happened here. And eventually we're going to have to take a good look at this legislation. I understand, I believe, Director, you said that you had a chance to maybe just thumb this through and look it through.
I scanned it here today, yes, sir.
Yeah, what we're doing here, of course, is creating a domestic terrorism act, which, as defined, says, as used in this section, the term terrorist act means any state or federal crime of violence. You see that this is, as long as you have reviewed it, is a good piece of legislation, something we ought to be doing. Are the laws on international terrorism not adequate at this point? Are these matters that maybe we best reserve to the states? And I know already we had the question in New York as to who is going to take jurisdiction. What are your thoughts?
In going through it specifically, there are a number of different sections where the FBI has either directly supported or proposed a particular proposal here, or where we supported it. So there are a number of sections that do have the FBI's view that, as translated again to the Department of Justice, that we should support that sort of enactment of legislation.
Dr. Higgins, do you have any comment on the legislation?
Treasury Department has the same rules that Justice Department has in terms of who comments on legislation, so I don't...
Department's in the same position?
Yes, I've glanced at this as the director did just before we sat down here, and I note that there are about a half a dozen items in the bill which were before the Congress in previous session, and in fact were included in the Omnibus Crime Bill. The State Department supported at that time many of them. I couldn't go through them all, but we were going to have to look at this, and the State Department will have to, the new Secretary of State and the new administration is going to have to decide which it and what it supports and what it doesn't